Could the Detroit Lions continue to improve their pass rush this offseason with the returning of Za'Darius Smith? That has been the recent rumor among Detroit Lions fans, and there's good reason to believe it. After an 8-game stretch last season that saw Za'Darius Smith total 4 sacks and 15 quarterback hits, many Detroit Lions fans were disappointed when he was released prior to free agency's beginnings. Brad Holmes, the general manager of the Detroit Lions, came out and said that Za'Darius Smith, despite being a good player for them, simply was just too expensive. The Detroit Lions could not afford the salary that he was demanding, and instead of restructuring his contract, they felt it was in their best interest to release him to the market and let him find a new home. But with recent developments of Za'Darius Smith finding himself in Detroit in recent days, many are continuing to speculate on whether or not Brad Holmes has continued communications and could return the pass rusher to Detroit. And today we're going to take a look at it, as Za'Darius Smith was a key part of the Detroit Lions playoff run a season ago. At 32 years old, Za'Darius Smith stands at 6'4", 270 pounds. Last season with the Cleveland Browns, he had 5 sacks in 9 games before being traded to the Detroit Lions, where he totaled 4 sacks in his final 8 games of the NFL regular season. On the entire season, he of course totaled 9 sacks on the year with 9 TFLs and 17 quarterback hits, and he was a good player in Detroit. He was genuinely a very good, strong player for the Detroit Lions defense, and one of the few constants for when he was actually on the field and seeing playing time. Za'Darius Smith in 2024 was traded for a 5th-round pick from the Cleveland Browns at the trade deadline day, and with the Detroit Lions played about 291 snaps, had 15 pressures and 4 sacks on the year. Now, Za'Darius Smith did have an issue of staying on the field. There were a lot of games where Za'Darius Smith was only playing 40 to 50% of defensive snaps, and he didn't feel like the Detroit Lions were ready for him to be a 3-down player, whether it be obvious rushing down situations, being taken out in the middle of drives, or just being really a situational player for them. Za'Darius Smith didn't have the impact that a lot of people believed he would. He had 4 sacks in 8 games, which is pretty solid, but overall, there was a lot of concern from fans that Za'Darius Smith wasn't playing every snap. He wasn't playing for even a majority of snaps in some games. And for a player you just traded a pick to acquire, that seems very strange. It seems like you'd want to keep that player on the field as much as possible to maximize his usage. And in fact, the Detroit Lions did nearly the opposite of that. Now, Brad Holmes came out prior to free agency right after the release of Za'Darius Smith and said that it was pretty simple. They just couldn't afford Za'Darius's contract. Do $11 million this year. Za'Darius Smith earned that contract. He is good enough to demand that kind of money. And after a 9-sack season at age 32, he deserves a top edge rusher 2 type of money. He deserves a $10 to $12 million contract for whatever team is willing to pay. Unfortunately, the Detroit Lions just are not that team. Brad Holmes said that we couldn't afford it, and that's the bottom line, that he was my communication with him and that he understood that, saying that Za'Darius Smith and himself had a lot of talks about it, had that conversation that they really liked Za'Darius Smith in Detroit. They wanted him to be here and they wanted that pass rush, but obviously there was no reconstruction in sight, and Brad Holmes felt like the best move for the Detroit Lions would be to move away from Za'Darius Smith, move away from that distraction of the offseason and focus on other things. Focus on bringing in DJ Reed, focus on re-signing some of the other players, focus on keeping the core and maintaining the players that they had that took them to a 15-2 record a season ago, and that is the route that he went. Now, $11 million may not seem like a lot, right? That might not seem in the grand scheme of NFL cap space, especially for those that believe the cap isn't real, that isn't a lot of money, right? The Lions paid DJ Chark $10 million. They paid Marcus Davenport $10 million. They've paid a lot of people that were less productive than Za'Darius Smith $10 million, $11 million on a season. But when you take a look at the Detroit Lions cap space, it gets thin really, really quickly. Assume that the Detroit Lions had paid that $11 million this year. That takes their $42 million in cap space, which at the moment is the 2nd highest in professional football, down to about $31 million. That's not awful. $31 million is still more than most organizations have at this point in time. But then you have to take out about $10 to $15 million for the draft class. That puts you at just $15 million for the regular season. And while, again, that isn't awful, if the Lions find themselves in a position where, say, hey, we want to make a trade at the deadline. We want to be buyers. We want to fit that final piece in. $15 million isn't really a whole lot for a team that is looking to acquire a superstar if that is needed. And if they're the Detroit Lions and those injuries arise yet again, they're going to need that reserve capital in order to continue to fund this roster and bring in players to fill roster holes due to injury. On top of that, you have upcoming extensions such as Aiden Hutchinson, Kirby Joseph, Jameson Williams, Brian Branch, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, and so many other players that are core foundational pieces to this team. Players that are far more important to the team than Za'Darius Smith has been and ever will be. And that's not to say that Za'Darius wasn't good. That's not to say that he's not deserving of the contract. And it's not to say that he wasn't important to the Lions postseason run, but he's not as important as Jack Campbell. He's not as important as Jameson Williams, as Aiden Hutchinson, as Kirby Joseph, as Brian Branch, as Sam Laporta, as Jahmyr Gibbs. Those guys are foundational. Those guys are cornerstones. Those guys need to be Detroit Lions if the Lions want to find success in the future. And Za'Darius Smith just doesn't. And that's the harsh reality, but it is the truth. Taking a look at the Detroit Lions edge rushers as of right now, there's a lot of overreaction when it comes to how poor this unit truly is. The unit currently looks like Aiden Hutchinson as your edge rusher 1, Josh Paschal, Marcus Davenport, and Al-Quadin Muhammad all fighting for that edge rusher 2 role, with Mitchell Agude, Isaac Uku, as well as Nate Lynn continuing to fight for roster spots at the bottom of the depth chart. Starting from the bottom, I think that both Isaac Uku and Nate Lynn have a dark horse spot on this roster. I think one of them will make it in the regular season, assuming they are healthy. Nate Lynn had 5 pressures and a sack and a half in his first game against the Giants before tearing his ACL in that game. And Isaac Uku played very well throughout the preseason as well, had a couple sacks, had a good amount of pressures, looked great throughout the first couple of games, and of course suffered a season-ending injuries to begin the season as well. Neither of them played in a regular season game, despite both being very impressive in the preseason. And while one of them will likely make the practice squad and one will likely make the active roster if healthy, I think they're both really solid dark horse options for this roster. Same thing goes for Mitchell Agude, who did play in the regular season, but primarily as a special teamer in that role. However, of course, you don't want to have to rely on undrafted free agent players coming off of ACL tears to fund your pass rush. So you look a little bit higher in the depth chart. Josh Paschal, Al-Quadin Muhammad, Marcus Davenport. We'll start with Davenport, who in 2 games with the Detroit Lions last year did have a half a sack. He was consistently pressuring the quarterback, consistently collapsing the pocket, being a good player on the run defense. And even though he got hurt very early on, which is something that a lot of Lions fans expect to happen again, he is a player that, when healthy, is very productive. When healthy, is a very good, viable option for a defense, and is a player that is worth keeping around, especially for the price tag that he got. Again, when you're taking a look at these players, it's very easy to overlook the contract because it's not money we have to spend. It's easy to look at Marcus Davenport and Za'Darius Smith and say, well, Za'Darius Smith is such a better football player. Why did we keep Marcus Davenport? But Marcus Davenport costs $2 million, while Za'Darius Smith would cost nearly $12 million. It is a sixth of the price it would cost to keep Za'Darius Smith on the roster as it would to keep Marcus Davenport. And a very similar thing goes for both Josh Paschal and Al-Quadin Muhammad. Josh Paschal's on his rookie contract, still had 2 sacks in 14 games a season ago, but is a great edge setter and an elite run defender. And Al-Quadin Muhammad was just as good as Za'Darius Smith from the pass rushing standpoint, if not more productive and efficient. As we talked about earlier, in 290 snaps on the defensive line, Za'Darius Smith totaled 4 sacks on the year across 8 games. Well, Al-Quadin Muhammad came in right around the same time as Za'Darius Smith, played in 9 games for the Detroit Lions, but only in 250 snaps and had 3 sacks on the NFL season. He was just as productive and efficient as Za'Darius Smith. And again, he's coming back on a $1.2 million contract, which means he is a tenth of the price that Za'Darius Smith would cost the Detroit Lions. If you put him and Marcus Davenport together, assume that they get 4 sacks on the season, that is a $2-3 million investment for the same production and same amount of quarterback sacks that Za'Darius Smith would give you for $12 million. And that's not even including Josh Paschal, who will likely get 2 to 3 sacks next season. That's not including any free agents they may continue to bring in. And that's not including any players that they may find through the NFL draft. Take a look at the sack leaders last year, excluding Za'Darius Smith. Aiden Hutchinson, of course, at 7.5. He is returning. Muhammad had 3 sacks and 250 defensive line snaps, one less than Za'Darius Smith. Josh Paschal had 2, and Marcus Davenport had a half a sack. Now, when you talk about Za'Darius Smith returning to Detroit, there is merit to that because he does love Detroit. He still lives in Detroit. He still goes to basketball games in Detroit. He still engages with the community in Detroit. He loves the city. He loves the people, and he hasn't signed anywhere yet. And I think that's a very good sign for the Lions if they want to return him. He hasn't signed elsewhere. I think he is still holding out and still is in contact with the Detroit Lions about potentially returning to the team as a pass rusher. But nothing's obviously in place yet. Brad Holmes did spend a draft pick on him, which I think would lead you to believe he wanted Za'Darius Smith here longer than just 8 games. And I think if a deal can be done, it will be. I think if a deal can be done for less than $5 million, Brad Holmes will continue to get those type of deals done. But I also think if it was going to cost less than $5 million, they would have restructured that before releasing him. They would have signed him to that already if that offer were on the table and willing to be accepted. I think draft picks make this a little murky. I think Al-Qudain Muhammad has made things a little bit murky. And again, if you're talking about a cost to production ratio and you're talking about value in free agency, I think Muhammad was a far better value pickup than Za'Darius Smith. I think that Marcus Davenport, even if he's only healthy for 4 to 5 games, is a better value pickup than Za'Darius Smith would have been. That's not to say Za'Darius Smith is bad. That's not to say Za'Darius Smith won't return, but I do think there is value to be had, and I do think those numbers are important to keep an eye on. So with that being said, that is all we really have for you guys today. A little bit of speculation, a little bit of, pros and cons to returning Za'Darius to the Detroit Lions. I think he's a great player. I think if they return him for the right price, he could be a really good option for them this year. But with the draft coming up, with, free agency still potentially being worked in, and of course the option to potentially sign Za'Darius Smith after the NFL draft if things don't go their way, there are still options for the Detroit Lions. So if you were one of the truthers that believe that the Detroit Lions don't have enough on the defensive line, there is still time to get help. There is still time to get more players and still time to return Za'Darius Smith if all else fails. But they also have the opportunity to get better. They have the opportunity to develop a younger version of Za'Darius Smith in Al-Qudain Muhammad. They have the opportunity to select a pass rusher at 28, a pass rusher at 60, a pass rusher at somewhere else in the NFL draft, or sign a player after it. So there are still lots of opportunities. The Detroit Lions will not take the field until September, which is, of course, several months away at this point. There is time. Take a breath, relax. If you want Za'Darius Smith to return, let me know in the comments down below. If you have your eyes set on somebody else, let me know that as well. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.